the 12th of November 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Please stand for a moment of silence and reflection. Thank you. Please be seated. At the beginning of each regular Planning Commission meeting, we allow time for a comment period where anyone can speak for up to 3 minutes on any topic that does not appear on the agenda. This comment period may last a maximum of 10 minutes. So if there's anyone here that wants to speak on any topic that is not on the Planning Commission agenda, please come forward. Okay, given I see no one, I want to announce a change to the agenda for Z3319 Corporate Center Drive at the intersection of Corporate Center Drive and Play Golf Way. The applicant has asked for this case to be deferred to the 10th of December. Is there anyone that came here to speak on this particular zoning case? Okay, we are going to defer Z3319 to the 10th of December Planning Commission meeting. Moving on to the report from the Committee of the Whole, Z1219 Sunnybrook Road.
Excuse me. Yes, good morning. So this appeared a few times at Committee of the Whole. Last meeting was voted to recommend approval 7-0, provided that the applicant had some specificity about where open space and one condition would be located. So she has done that. No other changes to the case other than that. So I can give you some slides if you wish, or
let's allow Ms. Hicks Commissioner Hicks to
Sure.
speak on the case.
Well, I think you pretty well summed it up, actually. Basically, we recommended approval of the case, provided that this additional condition be submitted. So perhaps it might be helpful to discuss the new condition.
Does anyone have any comments or questions about the new condition? Does anyone care to make a motion?
Well, so the condition is that all of the boundary with the subdivision behind is wooded, right?
right, so that the open space has to be contiguous with all of the boundary of the subdivision behind.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I'll move approval of this.
Do we have a second?
So,
Oh, yeah, sorry. Please go ahead and give us,
and this one, I believe it
Yeah.
says that it would be, the staff report says inconsistent with both future land use map and the comp plan policies.
so we have a sheet that, yeah, it's in the package.
Okay. It is?
So there should be included in the staff report what the staff recommended change to the future land use map should be, which in this case would be office and residential mixed use.
All right, well then, my motion is to approve Z12 and the associated future land use map amendment and the change to, what was that?
Office and residential mixed
Office
use.
and residential mixed use, both consistent with the comprehensive plan and both in the public interest.
But it's not consistent.
Well, yeah, so you're advising on whether or not it's consistent with the comp plan. You can approve it even if, or you can recommend approval even if it's inconsistent, but you would state why the approval would be reasonable and in the public interest.
Really? I think it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, isn't it?
I believe well, actually, it became consistent, didn't it? No, it didn't.
So
It's still a double
the staff
inconsistent.
report lists it as inconsistent.
Okay.
The planning commission could disagree and
Yeah.
state that it is consistent and base your reasons on that.
Right, well, I'd have to think why it's inconsistent. I think it is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
That can be your.
Okay. So that's your motion.
Yes.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? Okay. Moving on to the new, I'm sorry.
So I do apologize for doing the committee report myself. My instincts sort of kicked in, so stand at the podium.
Okay, so we're moving on to old business.
But now we'll move on to old business. That's correct. So this case is one of two that are related. So last time there was discussion of both, and so these cases were both held to address concerns about connectivity to parks and green space. So this particular one on the east side of New Hope Road is unchanged, but there are some changes to the conditions on the other one. So I will run through this one pretty briefly, just as a refresher. So both of these, Z21 and Z22, were part of the Old Town Plan Development District. Now 3 rezoning cases, these 2 before you today, and then a text change rezoning. The yellow area there from the PD was rezoned to R10 CU last year. These conditions are all remain unchanged. So use restrictions, a cap on density, a cap on non-residential use, some language about a grocery store needing to be included in a site plan, a cap on restaurants, and then through the course of planning commission discussions, some new ones were added about buildings on the perimeter, so near that R10 being shorter, so 4 stories where the rest is a 5-story, larger trees, a distance of bars from that same R10 area, and then there is, you might recall, a pedestrian tunnel that the applicant and developer is hoping to retain but may not be able to. So if it is unusable, there would be a 10-foot pat, which is supposed to be a path. So some supplement pedestrian connectivity to replace what would be a very good pedestrian connectivity. And that's just a slide showing where the different language of different conditions apply, because they reference address and PIN. Consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, consistent with the future land use map, consistent with a lot of policies about mixed-use development, inconsistent with the park connectivity for reasons described or discussed last time, hence the deferral. Again, no real changes to the case. I can pause here or launch into the second one if you'd prefer to talk about them all, both collectively.
I have a couple of quick questions, I think, if you don't mind, and there may be others. So can you show me, you said there were new conditions for?
On Z22, the other.
Okay, so then there are no new conditions in
Correct.
this. All right. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to 22?
Just to be clear, that 10-foot path would connect to the sidewalk on the east side of
Right.
South?
So there'll be a road entering the project here. So the tunnel is somewhere right there. So if the tunnel is unusable, there would have to be a 10-foot path from this site to this red line.
Okay, thank you.
So is this case consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future
Yes,
land use map?
yes.
So it is consistent and consistent. All right. So we have not had a presentation yet and public input on 22. So
We did last planning commission meeting, yes.
I don't think we did on 22.
They were both deferred? Or it was deferred without? The meeting ran long. Okay, I apologize, that was.
Yeah. So we're going to do the whole process
Okay,
for
sure.
22. So
Okay, so this is the other case on the other side of New Hope, 43 acres, same CAC vote. They voted on both pieces at the same time. So again, for reference, we're now in the light blue area on the left there. So conditions on this case also prohibiting a number of uses, limiting the number of lots with non-residential uses, so most commonly referred to as It would be a frontage lot on New Hope Road, out parcel. That's the word I was thinking of. There's a prohibition on medical and office uses, which for our purposes of our land use and vision analysis are treated the same, so that's why those are together. So a limit on that on 110,000 square feet, and then all other commercial uses, a cap of 75,000 square feet. And then, so these are the new conditions that were added since the last time that at least the packet was in your backup. So requiring a 10-foot multi-use path along South New Hope Road. So the standard street design manual would require a 6-foot sidewalk. So this is enough to accommodate bike and pedestrian traffic. And then greenway easements to be dedicated to the city. So there is, right, whenever there is something on the capital area greenway master plan, a developer is required to have a reservation for an easement, which basically means they can't submit a site plan for that area, and the city has the ability within some number of years, I believe, to purchase an easement, and they can request to renew. So in this case, the developer is just promising to dedicate it outright to the city. So that would be on the rear side of the site there on the west side, where the tributary of the river is. And then the multi-use path would be along the New Hope Road frontage. This one is also consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. That change to the conditions did shift a policy from inconsistent to consistent in the staff report, that PR 3.8. So the only inconsistent policies have to really do with development in the floodplain. There is some floodplain on the site. And the UDO does have restrictions on how much impervious surface can go in the floodplain, but it's mostly a comparison. I believe the ED had more open space designation in those areas, so that would now be developable. But consistent overall, and consistent with the future land use map.
Thank you.
I can answer any questions.
I'm puzzled by, so the UDO allows development of 50% of the 100-year floodplain, but
Correct.
the comp plan recommends against that?
That's right.
Leaving us to do what?
Well, that means that if it's zoning, just like you ask for or you discuss all sorts of conditions that are not mandated by the UDO but relate to policy. So when a zoning change implicates property within the floodplain, as part of that discussion, you may inquire about additional protections for the floodplain.
There you go. Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Okay, then let's bring up the applicant. The applicant and supporters get 10 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, my name is Charles Walker, 275 North Pea Ridge Road, Pittsboro, North Carolina, 27312. Bob, thank you for pointing out one of our conflicts that we deal with on a regular basis here. This is the other part of South New Hope Road. This is the west part of South New Hope Road. Z21 is the east part of South New Hope Road. On this tract of land, this is where the ability to do office and some retail on that side is set up to support the overall Old Town project, as well as the development that has taken place over the years in that quadrant. What was originally conceived in the Old Town plan is kind of what we're doing here, is all of the pedestrian-friendly, small-scale, mixed-use stuff is on the east side of New Hope Road, between the commercial property of the proposed Z21 and the development that was approved through the bank rezoning last year. We envision this is all the other stuff that everyone needs to live, a gas station, a C-store, some drive-in restaurants, stuff like that, as well as an office component. So if you view the two cases together, that kind of provides a total mixed use of the area, even though it's on two different tracts of land in two different cases. The part that we seen, the staff that we were a little confused over was that we're consistent on everything except for the environmental protection and linking to greenways. In our conditions, we are promising a 10-foot multi-use path along the entire frontage. The difference between Z21 and Z22 is that 22 has frontage from the intersection of South New Hope and Rock Quarry all the way to the bridge. So we control that entire frontage. So we have as in a condition listed to do a multi-use path instead of a sidewalk. And then the other thing that we've done as far as the greenway connections or possible greenway connections is to go ahead and dedicate the easements not only on Walnut Creek but on Big Branch through the process. Yes, we intend to use the allotted amount of disturbance in the floodplain. We just, given that area and that section of town, the relatively narrow width of that tract of land, but long in frontage, we're going to have to be able to use that 50%, up to 50%, for things like some parking. It's probably going to be more stormwater devices than anything else, spotted around toward the back of the project, because we envision that the office use, however many buildings it is, will be closer to Big Branch, and then there'll be a buffer to the creek and to Big Branch, and then also to the residential, older residential neighborhoods that are on the other side of Big Branch from there. So that is how we structured the case. The amount of square footages that we have limited the project to has held it under the trigger point for the TIA and the zoning based on what was allowed there now as part of the original Old Town case. So we don't anticipate a huge amount of a traffic shift as what's allowed there today. One bit of information that I was able to get since we last met is that I have confirmed that the entrance to the project, to the Old Town project, is going to be signalized. We've gotten confirmation from the DOT that that's the case. It's going to be signalized, and it'll have all the accoutrements of a full intersection. We anticipate that if Z22 is approved, that will turn that intersection into a four-legged intersection instead of three. And I'll be glad to answer any other questions that you may have.
Travis, can you stop the clock? Thank you. So before we ask questions, I'd like to bring staff back up to answer your question about the inconsistent policy that is of concern.
Sure. I mean, I can talk about the inconsistent policies for both cases. So going to this one, to follow on with Mr. Geary's question, part of our analysis when doing policy analysis is to look at the difference between what is existing and what is not existing and what was proposed. So the PD proposed is this area of this case on the west side to be constructed wetlands. So had there not been a condition like that on the ground, I'm not sure if this policy would have been necessarily triggered, because the UDO, it would be treating it differently than the UDO treats it. It's hard to answer right now, but for sure, under the original PD, there was more protection. So in terms of the conditions on the other case, which is what I believe was just talking about the connections to the Greenway. So we did discuss, or perhaps a map would be helpful. So the conditions on what's labeled here as TCZ4 require a Greenway with a map attachment, so we roughly know where that'll be. As part of this text change rezoning, they are proposing to put the Greenway someplace different. So it will come down and go along the northern side of the right-of-way that would be on the Z21 site. So park staff identified that as a connection that would be beneficial. Part of the reason these cases were deferred last time was to sort of sort through. We did discuss Greenway is going to be from this particular site. If not, the applicant has provided a path, so the further enhancement to connect to the Greenway would be to cross the street. So we did discuss ways that a condition could require some sort of pedestrian crossing. Mr. Walker is entirely correct. They have much more control and certainty over this case than where the ultimate road network is going to be on this case. So there's proposed to be a roundabout somewhere there. So presumably there'll be a crossing here at the intersection he just described, and then potentially other crossings somewhere. So it is a little bit more unclear as to where a crossing would go or should go. Our transportation friends would say you don't want too many crossings too close to each other either. So ultimately he chose not to add a condition at this time to this Z21 case for reasons I think are valid and reasonable, but I think the policy inconsistency remains because the situation still remains. So it's a bit, of a balancing act between what policy says you can do, should be doing, and what you can do in real life based on, the information you have.
Okay.
So the condition in Z21 is for a 10-foot wide pedestrian connection to something. I understood it to be the sidewalk on South New Hope Road,
I believe
but maybe I'm
the
a little garbled. in
condition
staff
wording, which I
write-up,
want
what
to
it's a
check.
connection to.
The condition 9 that was shown on the screen does not have all the wording of the condition 9 in our case.
Right.
Right.
If I can just read the whole condition that we have.
Could you move to the microphone, please?
Sorry. If the existing pedestrian tunnel cannot be used as a pedestrian connection, there will be a minimum of a 10-foot wide path directly connected at grade to the sidewalks that will be constructed as part of the main project entrance east of South New Hope Road. So what we're promising is
Somewhere
that
on
we will
those
provide
sidewalks.
on our site a 10-foot multipath that'll hit that sidewalk whenever and wherever it's built.
Right. Okay.
And that's as far as we can go because that's where our property stops.
Okay. That's all right. Thank you.
So, given that, does anyone have questions for the applicant, other questions for the applicant at this point?
I had a question. I was just curious, with the background of the previous PD, are y'all considering any advanced BMPs for that side, since it is the confluence of Big Branch and Walnut Creek?
We will follow the city code as per, once we understand what the actual design or the development of that tract is. We know the limitation is 50%. We don't, that is our limitation that we have to work at. As far as the level of BMP, I can just say right now that we'll meet the city code in that area. The reason why I think that we're inconsistent with the environmental things is that the current comp plan is built on the Old Town PDD. The Old Town PDD was wiped away last year. We're the last vestiges of it. That engineered wetlands was part of a more active cross-environmental between the two projects. But now the project that that's under Z4 is owned by the Raleigh Group, and they're doing they've revamped their stormwater ponds to be wholly held on their side of the project. On the original Old Town plan, there was the idea to do engineered wetlands if needed as part of the stormwater stormwater policy. You remember that the original project had a golf course in it, and the golf course not only met the tree save areas for the entire project, it also was going to be, the idea was all the water features on the golf hole itself was going to be the stormwater devices. And then if there was anything else that needed to be done, it was going to be held in those engineered wetlands. Of course, all those project decisions are gone now because Old Town PD is gone. So that is why we're inconsistent, just because the comp plan is built on the old PDD project.
Do you have a follow-up question for the applicant? Okay. Any additional questions, comments for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here to speak in support of this, either one of these zoning cases? Well, actually, I guess I can only say for Z2219.
I think there's a letter in your packet from the Raleigh Group supporting our case.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Please come forward. No. Okay. So, given I see no one here to speak in support, is there anyone here to speak in opposition to Z 2219? All right. Seeing none, let's bring it back to the table. Any further discussion about this case? Are you ready to entertain a motion? We'll need to make separate decisions for the two cases, 21 and 2. So we can discuss them together if you like, if there's any further discussion that needs to be had.
I definitely have some discussion.
Okay.
Understanding that this is a complex case and that it goes back to that previous rezoning. I think some of y'all weren't here for that, but I voted against that project for a number of reasons. One in particular, because it was really low density, kind of sprawling development in a floodplain and kind of close to the confluence of Walnut Creek and Big Branch, and that even though the previous PD was a golf course that didn't happen, there were a lot of elements in that that were contextually relevant to here, and I voted against that first case. I think that I understand that from a financing standpoint, there were a lot of quagmires that they were trying to figure out, but there's so much land here, and I just don't see that this is in the best interest for our community. I did not see an actual floodplain map. Just eyeballing it, probably 60 or 70% of Z2219 is in the floodplain. It's right at a confluence. It doesn't show on here, but like literally it's at a confluence of the two streams. And I feel like we just have to be protecting those areas since we have so much flooding and are trying to improve our water quality in the area. And I just don't think that, personally, that this is the type of kind of development that we should be doing in the floodplain.
So are there conditions that could be added to make it palatable to you, or is it just?
I mean, what was there before made sense. It connected to the greenways, and it was an active area that dealt with the ebbs and flows of these areas. Compartmentalizing it, kind of saying that we can only do this over here. I mean, it's how many acres, I mean, I just disagree with the approach. So maybe not.
Okay, thank you.
Based off the yield that they need or the agreements that they have that we're unprivy to.
Matt, your objection is, well, I understand your general objection, but as far as the floodplain area is concerned, that relates to Z22, doesn't it not? Or does it also relate to Z21?
Sorry, I guess I see that trying to look at this as a package where one side has kind of denser apartments and, more mixed-use living, and then the other side is
Commercial.
auto-driven, or auto-focused.
Yeah.
I mean, I just see it being pavement, and
Well,
I mean, look at that.
That is
I
the
mean,
other side, though.
Yeah. But I'm just saying. I mean, look at that, and that they're going to disturb 50% of that.
So the blue on this map is floodway. That's unbuildable. It's the sort of purple area is the 100-year floodplain, just to be clear.
Yeah. But personally, I think that we just we should be treating these areas differently.
Any further discussion?
I just wanted to add, I have some concerns about that as well. I'm wondering, does staff have any recommendations on how to improve that condition?
Not being the stormwater expert, there seems to be very many options for limiting development in the floodplain, from BMPs to flat out no no development. So I'm not sure at this time what would flip that policy. I think I would solicit some input from stormwater on that one, but
Remind me what BNP stands for.
it's a best management practice.
Best
so it's-
management.
mhm. There is a text change in the works to change that part of the UDO, I believe to add some requirements rather than have it be optional.
And
I see also a stormwater friend walking towards me.
good. As it's written now, could you put structures on that since it's not specified for parking or, you know, BMPs?
The UDO limits impervious development to 50%. So,
So you could put a structure of some sort on it, so
right.
Well, but you have to elevate the structure out of the harm's way.
feet or whatever.
Typically is done with fill, and the issue with fill, of course, is that the water that would have been absorbed by the floodplain is now displaced by the fill somewhere else. So it changes the shape of the floodplain. If it's a little bit of fill, it changes it by a little bit. But if you allow that cumulatively a lot in the floodplain, then obviously it would, you know, it would change the shape of the water of the floodplain somewhat more significantly and potentially impact other properties that were not in the floodplain before. So that's one of the reasons why in general fill is frowned upon, even though historically and today we have allowed a certain amount of it within the 100-year floodplain.
That was more eloquent to the point that I was trying to make.
It might be, to my mind, it might be useful to specify how the floodplain, 100-year floodplain would be developed to give it some direction so that you couldn't, you know, fill it.
Is that a question for the applicant?
Yes, not really, but yes, because that's something you could consider or work with.
What we are contemplating to work with now is the current city code, which allows 50% disturbance. Over and above the floodplain, right, I guess it's right there, is the city of Raleigh pump station for that entire region, which is also in the floodplain. So we are just, our current offer was to follow the city code. I don't know about trying to just randomly toss a number to the planning commission about what it may or may not be. If you're asking for, if the 50% disturbance or the possible 50% disturbance of the floodplain area be limited to 50% of the disturbance being impervious cover, because again, we're talking about fill, that's the low side of the project, that's where the BMPs would be. I could offer something like that, but as far as just throwing any other kind of generalizations out there, we're committed to tied to the city code.
So I'd like to give our stormwater staff a moment to come forward because I think there's possibly some additional information here.
Hi, good morning. Ashley Rogers, Stormwater. The only major thing I wanted to bring up is since we were talking about possible additional BMPs, or we call them SCMs, that would not be necessarily what you would want in a floodway fringe. Basically, we have two exemptions in our code as it relates to additional detention and when it may be either no benefit or an adverse impact. If you start randomly putting SCMs into the floodway fringe,
SEM.
stormwater control measure, it's a BMP. BMP is the old terminology. They're the same thing. If you start doing that, then what essentially you can do is you can hold back water and then release it at an inopportune time where you actually make flooding worse. So you end up doing exactly the opposite of what you intended. So I just think that in any conversations, and I think this is worth having more conversations between stormwater staff and the applicant, if there is a desire to go above and beyond the code as it relates to floodplain conditions, because you do have to be careful about what you specify so that you don't cause an adverse impact.
Thank you. So we have some options. We can table this and allow more conversation. We can vote on it today. does the applicant have a preference? Do you want us, it seems like there's a lot of angst around Z22.
The issue that we have today is those are 2 decimal place decisions on a project that hasn't been designed yet. So I don't know how we could craft conditions that would do that could address those 2 decimal place decisions at this point, because we don't even know where the buildings are going to be. We don't know exactly where the parking's going to be. The case just addresses the land issues, its generalized layout, and its generalized size. Other than that, we really don't have any other parameters that we're working with. I understand what the commission is asking for, but I'm at a little bit of a loss to figure out how to promise,
Would you be willing to talk with stormwater staff over the next 2 weeks to see if there's anything that might help?
We can try, but I don't
Okay.
really see a difference coming, but I
understand,
we're
but
following the city, we're coming in following the city code.
I understand, but I'm hearing that there's a lot of angst around this and the vote may not go your way. So I'm looking for a willingness to spend 2 weeks having some conversation.
Okay, I don't think we have a choice from what I'm hearing here, but I don't think in 2 weeks the answer is going to be any different.
I do think it would be useful to see some sort of definition to how you plan to use that floodplain area so that we can at least have some comfort in knowing that it's, not going to be fill and built up. That would help a little bit. Personally, it'd be wonderful if you could specify that parking surface would be pervious. I know that there's additional cost to doing something like that, but I think that would, address how important this land is in terms of being a floodplain.
Listen, I'm the regional designer of Old Town from 15 years ago, and it was very important then, it's very important now. But what we're proposing now is consistent with the original plan, which has been our underpinning since the beginning, to try and honor the original plan, even though it's been broken up. So we've been trying to be consistent with that.
All right, so what's your pleasure, commission members?
Well, so just for myself, I think I'm prepared to vote yes on Z21, not on Z22. And I do think it would be helpful to define what you plan to do and what greater measures you can take to protect that 100-year floodplain. So that's where I am.
Okay.
All right, so are we prepared to, let's table 22 for 2 weeks.
Okay.
All right, and so we'll go ahead and vote on 21. Is that where we are? Or
I just want to make sure that I'm clear, because I thought they were saying that whatever impacted on 22.
could you use your,
I just want to make sure, I thought the statement was whatever impacted one part does have inadvertently impact the second as it relates to the stormwater. Did I misunderstand that?
Z21 doesn't have any floodplain on it.
But I thought they were saying when you start building, it could then have an indirect impact, or did I misunderstand?
South New Hope Road is the ridge line. If something's on the east side of South New Hope, it's going to stay on the east side. If it's on the west side, it stays on the west side. South New Hope is the ridge.
okay. Any more conversation about Z21? All right, anyone ready to make a motion for Z21?
I'm ready to make a motion. I don't want it to get voted down. Are we all nodding? Are we okay with Z21, or should we hold that as well?
I'm prepared to support Z21.
21 is fine by me.
Well, then I'll move approval of Z21. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's consistent with the future land use map, I believe. And it's in the public interest to develop this property at this time.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Which were the noes? Okay, thank you. All right, moving forward to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make notes to to Z 2919 5706 Rock Quarry Road and 3801 and 3831 Pearl Road.
Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. This case was previously presented on October 22nd. One update, several actually, but I did want to point out that the CAC vote, the South CAC vote was held last week, and that vote was 9-8 in favor with 2 abstentions. You have seen previously that this proposal is located along Rock Quarry. There's a considerable residential development in its midst, and they're located near the Old Town PD as well as the Barwell Road Park mixed-use activity center there at Shops at Battle Bridge. And closer in, both single-family and townhome development and apartments across Rock Quarry. This proposal is impacted by the street plan, which does show the realignment of Pearl Road and Rock Quarry. That realignment is programmed and should be completed within the next couple of years. The site currently is a rural residential area, 3 parcels consisting all under the same ownership. This is a earlier photo of the Quarry Trace Apartments located across Rock Quarry from the proposed site. Another perspective on that rural residential site, the current condition of the property. These proposed conditions were updated and some new ones were provided on October 24th. The applicant also added parking limited frontage to the proposal. Generally these conditions are, number one, it would be an age-restricted community and sets a density cap. The proposal does seek some relief from the block perimeter requirements, prohibits retail and restaurant uses and office uses other than as an accessory use. A pedestrian path that will connect with Apperson Drive shall be constructed. I think the staff report noted that the easement would be recorded prior to a certificate of occupancy, but just to be clear, the condition does state that that pedestrian path will be constructed. Also, the applicant has offered to install a Type 2 protective yard along the southern and eastern boundaries of the project. That did address staff's concerns on buffering. Just a perspective on the existing versus proposed zoning. You see that this would have a maximum number of residential units, 88, and the entitlement of office that would be permitted. As mentioned, this is along an urban transit emphasis corridor in accordance with the urban form map, and the applicant has indicated that they will use a parking limited frontage on this site. These consistent policies, 2 policies have moved from inconsistent to consistent. I would point out the buffering requirements and the frontage requirements. Inconsistent, of course, it is inconsistent with the flume, which does designate this area for low-density residential. Connectivity is a concern. However, that although it doesn't completely remove it as an inconsistent policy, the concerns, many of the concerns about block perimeter and overall pedestrian connectivity have been addressed with the condition to construct a pedestrian path. Just a couple of issues on this case. The application does refer to the, it does call for an RX, and RX does provide for a range of housing types. And although the applicant has indicated that apartments will be built on this site. And also, the application does refer to this being an affordable housing for seniors project. However, we don't have a condition that states that specifically, and of course the applicant has indicated that that is not possible to do given the timing of things. It does require a flume amendment, changing from low-density residential to moderate-density residential, since it would be 11 units to the acre. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and just an illustration of that map change. I believe the applicant is here. I would like to make a brief presentation as well.
Any questions for staff?
Type 2 buffer, could you refresh our memories on that?
I believe that is that type 2 is a 20-foot buffer that would be added.
Any other questions for staff before we move on to the applicant?
I have a question. Is the office use restricted to accessory to the apartments, or did I?
That's correct.
Okay.
It would have to be part of that development.
Thank you.
I've got a question. We've got a, excuse me, a close CAC vote. I was just wondering if you were at the meeting or staff was at the meeting.
I was,
that
yes.
Could kind of go over what the discrepancies were between the community.
Major concern was traffic, and also there was some concerns about the perception that affordable housing is being concentrated in this area. I think those were the two main issues. We did discuss with the CAC the road realignment between Pearl Road and Rock Quarry, plus any improvements that the developer may be required to put in as a result of the site review process. Also, the traffic generation numbers do show that the traffic that would be generated from this senior age-restricted development would be roughly equivalent to the traffic that would be generated from the current entitlement of R4, which would be a maximum of 32 single-family units. So that was discussed, and then the affordable housing issue was discussed as well. So those were the main concerns.
All right. Any other questions for staff before we move to the applicant? All right. Please come forward.
This is my slides, right? Yes. Okay, good. Good morning. I'm Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946, Raleigh 27602. Here with me today is Tim Morgan of Evergreen Construction, the prospective developer, Rick Baker, our civil engineer, and Becky Bascom, our architect. Don did a great job of going through the case very thoroughly. Just to add a little bit of color to that, we feel like that the current, and I had some, not sure my presentation got in here because I thought I got fouled up by the holiday yesterday, but I'm very pleased to see that it got on. So if you'll look at this adjacent property to our east, it's fairly high density now. I mean, it's zoned R6, but it's in a townhouse form. It wouldn't be permitted to be developed that way today, and it looks like it's approximately 10 units to the acre. So we're only requesting 11, even though our zoning's going to be RX. I don't think it's drastically different from the property to the east. And then across the street, we've got RX zoning, just what we were requesting. The development across the street is affordable. However, our prospective development is senior housing, so we think that distinguishes us in terms of looking at affordable housing concentration in the area. As you know, Rock Quarry is a busy thoroughfare, and Pearl Road is as well, and this realignment is scheduled to be completed in the spring of 2023, which we think will improve the traffic on Rock Quarry and on Pearl. It'll add, I believe, a signalized intersection there. And our development will be required to be placed into service in December of 2022, and by the time it's fully leased, it'll probably be about the same time the Pearl Road realignment is completed. So I think that there will be some enhancements to traffic on this corridor from that realignment one, and for the traffic and the right-of-way improvements that will be brought by this development. We're proposing 84 units, age-restricted, 55 and older. It will be a secure building where you leave a building, it automatically locks. There will be affordable units for 30%, 40%, 50%, 60% of AMI, and the rents will be increased, which correspond with those income sectors. There will be a 20-foot wide buffer around the south and east, buffering the residential, and a pedestrian connection. That's a layout. The layout's going to need to be tweaked a little bit, but we will be consistent about that pedestrian connection. However, the layout building will probably be changed a little bit to try to work with the frontage. We do have a few challenges right in that corner, right on Rock Quarry and Pearl. There's a large telephone equipment easement that we have to honor. And then it's sort of confusing as to how to deal with, excuse me, the Pearl Road frontage, because that little triangular area right in here is, right now, it's on the other side of Pearl Road, but Pearl's going to go up there, so we have to figure out how to address the frontage issue there. As Don said, this case has been deemed to be overall consistent with the comprehensive plan and the urban form map, and compatible with the neighborhood. It is on true transit lines, which we think is a great for affordable and really any apartment development. Close proximity to retail. We've got shops at Battle Bridge. We've also got a Dollar General, several restaurants in the area. Traffic was the biggest problem at the CAC, which is probably every development across the city, as you hear, I'm sure, every meeting. We do think there are some improvements coming, and we do think senior affordable is a low traffic generator by comparison. I have here today Rick Baker, our civil. We can go into some traffic numbers if we want to. I think I do want to close with the offer of discussing that in a more detailed way. We do have some trip generation numbers, and just generally, I'll pull those up. Let me clear this. You can see that single-family total trips, if it's fully built out, so that's 32 units, would be 364, compared to total trips for our fully built out 88-unit senior housing is 328, so the total trips actually decrease. And we think that's an important statistic. We do think this adds to the affordable housing stock in close proximity to transit, retail, and a city park. Barwell Park is just across Rock Quarry on Pearl/Barwell Road. We add to the senior housing. We facilitate right-of-way improvements. And it's placing high-density development on a transit corridor, which we think is in accordance with the city's goals. So with that, I'll conclude offering to answer any questions I can, or our civil engineer, architect, and developer are here as well.
Okay. Questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I was just curious, through site plan, would you have to address the frontage with the new street path? Wouldn't you have to respect the new street realignment, or handle that through site review, or no?
It would depend on what the boundaries of the site were at the time the development plan was submitted.
Okay. I guess because it's adjacent to and not through it, they might.
Yeah, I mean, so the street's going to jog
Yeah.
to the west. But if that hasn't happened and it's still on this alignment and this is the boundary of the site, then we don't really have a mechanism for saying you have to meet this new alignment, because it's not a thing that officially exist yet. It hasn't been platted. It's not reflected in the pattern of the lots around there. It doesn't physically exist. So, and it doesn't run through the property. If it ran through the property, then absolutely we'd be looking to adjust the right of way and the shape of the parcels and all this other stuff. But since it's off-site, I don't think that we can take it into account at the time of site review unless the thing has already being built. It's already officially on a map somewhere, other than the comp plan street map.
Well, I'm interested in that, but I have a different question. Why is it that you can't offer a condition about the affordable, you just specified
Well,
what
the
the affordable
timing of
housing will be?
affordable housing, and I can get Tim to come up here and he can tell it to you better than I can, but the timing of getting the right approvals in place, you know, we've got to get the zoning in place before the Housing Finance Agency tax credits are approved. And then a lot of pieces have to go together. And if we ended up restricting this property, which we don't own yet, we have it under contract, to affordable, and then we weren't able to get, say, the Housing Finance Agency tax credits, so we were not able to do this development, those property owners would be stuck with an affordable condition, which they have absolutely no ability to do. If you're not an experienced developer, you cannot get those tax credits. So they're then stuck with the site that they have no ability to develop in accordance with the conditions. So it's it's always a little balancing act.
You are specifying that it'll be age-restricted housing, so
That's true.
the owners would be
They would be
left with that.
That though is doable, as a market developer could do a senior housing development there.
Not possible to add a condition to say that you will be seeking tax credits for this project?
I talked with Mr. Belk about that, would there be some possibility of saying we'll make our best efforts or we'll apply. I don't think he thought that was a great idea. The staff didn't like that kind of, condition. I don't think we'd have an objection to adding that as a condition if the staff would accept that as a condition. And city attorney may have a comment on that.
I was going to ask if the attorney has a...
And kind of leading into that, is there a difference between affordable housing for seniors, the maximum income, and just everybody else?
No.
There's not.
I think
So,
they look
almost-
at
yeah.
area median income.
Right.
And so it's going to be a Social Security, maybe a small
just-
pension, something like that.
But in all probability, they were going to meet whatever definitions of affordability that are out there if it's going to be seniors anyway.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
probably
for
true.
what it's worth. It's going to be kind of
It's going to
tough
force you probably to
yeah.
be
May not
naturally
be
occurring.
entirely true,
Yeah.
but I do have a question about the buffering.
I don't know that that's true, Dave. I mean, I'm not sure it matters. It would be nice to have this as an affordable housing project. If HFA won't finance that, does that mean we shouldn't rezone this RX3? That's the question, I think.
So can we get some thought about, can intentions be part of a condition?
So I haven't seen what the proposed language look like, but I think the issues probably be with enforceability. It has to be something that's, intentions is very subjective.
I mean,
I understand.
so remember that this is going to come in for site review, and a site review is going to be, specialist is going to be sitting at their desk reviewing this plan, and there's going to be this condition, and they're going to try to check compliance on the plan with the condition. So what are they going to check? They're going to go to the applicant and say, are you guys trying real hard to get the tax credits, or are we going to require some documentation that they've applied? I mean,
Well,
this is from an enforceability standpoint, and
I think they
then,
would be checking whether they have gotten a tax credit approval or not.
and I don't know if they're going for 4% or 9%, but 9% is there's only a few projects that win in Wake County in any given year. So, it's a competitive process. If they're going for 4%, they're going to need some potentially other mechanism of gap financing, which also might be competitive. So it's a little bit hard to guarantee that they're going to get a tax credit allocation for the project, even if they're full intent is to go to it, although, depending on, they might have a very good chance at it. So we would just be concerned with the wording of the condition that it's something that we can reasonably enforce. And what is the time period for enforcement? We approve the development plan. They're going to go build it. Do we not give them their CO? I mean, so I think, it should be something that should be done at the time that the development plan is filed. And I'm not really sure what we could reasonably ask for at that point in terms of a guarantee that they're making a best effort.
So hearing all of that, I think what we're considering here is an age-restricted senior project that may or may not be affordable.
Yeah, and I would like Tim Morgan to address some of the affordability issues, because this is all they do, and I just think it'd be helpful to hear from him.
But you're correct. Tim Morgan with Evergreen Construction, 7706 Six Forks Road, located here in Raleigh. As Isabel said, we've been around since 1978, and we specialize in developing, building, and managing affordable housing across the state. We have 46 properties in our portfolio, which is just over 2,000 units. We have partnered on 12 previous occasions with the city of Raleigh in obtaining loan funds to assist with developing affordable housing within the city limits of Raleigh. We will be applying for tax credits, which starts in January, and that's done through the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. And it's a two-step process. You do a pre-app in January. They go out and look at the site. They score it. They also order up a market study from a third-party consultant, and then they provide that information to you. So then in May, you can make the determination whether you want to move forward or not. Simultaneously, we will be applying with the City of Raleigh's Housing and Neighborhood Department for loan funds. Their deadlines are very similar with the Housing Finance Agency. We'll turn the applications in January. It will come before council in April. Whether those loan funds are approved or not, we don't know until April. We will also be applying for loan funds through Wake County. Very similar time frame. January, they take it to the commissioners in April. And so those are all very important pieces of what we do. We're getting those loans at reduced interest rates, which allow us to keep the rents lower as well. We'll have 84 units. One bedrooms will range from 400, 500, 600, 700. The two bedrooms are 475, 575, 675, 775. So it is a mixed income, if you will, within the development itself. We have units set aside at 30%, 40%, 50%, and 60% of the area median income. And so, so we submit in May to the full app to the Housing Finance Agency, and in August, we know who's won and who has lost. Wake County usually gets about 3 properties. So it's about a 25 to 30% chance.
Thank you.
And you need this rezoned RX3 first before you can begin this application process?
Yes, sir, that's the first domino, if you will. We've got to have zoning in place for the housing finance by the full app deadline, which is May. But for the city to take it before the council, as well as the county to take it before the commissioners, that zoning has to be in place by April.
So if for some reason you don't get HFA financing and/or city-county financing, you would still have a rezoning of RX3 that is age-restricted. That's right?
Yes, yes. But our contract calls for us to close sometime in next November. We've got to have all those conditions of our contract approved.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Additional questions for the applicant?
Tell me a little bit about the buffering.
The buffer is a type 2 20-foot wide buffer. And the plantings for that, Rick, can you comment on that at all? I can't give you the specific numbers of trees and shrubs. 20-foot wide.
Curious. I was a little surprised it was only 20 feet. I was kind of expecting a 50.
Well, 10 feet is all that would normally be required. And it'll go here all the way there. And it's, you know, it's buffering residential to residential. And, yeah, so.
Thank you.
The only other question I had, and I don't think, you know, I always think about block perimeter and just services, knowing that this has private servicing for utility or for weekly trash and receptacles and things like that. Just from a, is there a simple way that if, say, it didn't go forward, but the rezoning happened, if it was going to be detached single-family homes, that you could adhere to the stub?
Well, we've actually conditioned it. Part of our condition is we have specified a multi-unit building.
Okay.
Don didn't touch on that in our last set of revised conditions.
Oh, okay.
I think you'll see that multi-unit requirement in the first condition.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Then.
All right, any further questions for the applicant? All right, we have 2 minutes and 3 seconds left for any supporters that would like to come forward to speak. Seeing none, so we have 10 minutes at 2 minutes per person for those in opposition to this case. So please come forward if you want to speak in opposition to this case. Please remember to state your name and address before.
My name is Brandy McNeil. I'm at 4528 Lord Mario Court. A resident moved, bought a house over there probably back in June. One of my main concerns is I feel like this vote should have never even made it to this level. Pearl Road is part of the South CAC. All the surrounding neighborhoods that will be directly impacted by this rezoning are in the Southeast CAC. If you look at the neighborhoods in the South CAC, they're all neighborhoods down the far edge of Rock Quarry near Southgate. So a lot of the meetings, a lot of the people that helped this vote get passed were from that area. The people that would be directly impacted with traffic, with the big structure of the apartments that have yet to be seen because the residents haven't moved in yet, of the apartment complex that's already there, none of those people were included. I have the list of the neighborhoods that are part of the Southeast CAC and the South CAC. So for us on Pearl Ridge, our neighborhood, which is Camelot Village, Mallory Square, to even be included in the South CAC vote was not fair to begin with, because that does not represent the surrounding area. All the neighborhoods on Barwell, all the neighborhoods that are past us on Rock Quarry were not even included or did not know about this. The same with the apartments that are up now. A lot of the community didn't know. If you go on Nextdoor, all of those Nextdoor people that are in my community that they linked me with, none of those people helped or were even considered when this vote was thought about. Also regarding traffic, it already has been addressed with the city of Raleigh. Again, you all know the realignment. That's already saying that there's already a problem. So for more additional developments to come before that's complete. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I saw someone else who was coming forward. Oh, yes.
Hi, my name is Christy Payne. I'm the HOA president of Camelot Village, which is down Pearl Road. My address is 4504 Lord Mario Court, so I live on the same street as Brandy. One of the big things, whenever we found out about it, when we went back and told the community, it was upsetting because a lot of people said, well, I guess it's time to move. We already have a bunch of affordable apartments across the street. Now they're talking about doing more on our side of the street. So you're looking at 180 of these, you know, right there at us. We felt like it was just like too many right there in that one spot. The 55 and up, I don't mind as much, but I feel like who's going to watch and make sure it's really just 55 and up? I mean, a grandma could move in and then the whole family move in. Like, I just feel like, and so the traffic thing, I just don't feel like the traffic thing is accurate either, because let's say a grandma moves in and she has a daughter with a few kids, you know, and they move in, she's driving to work, and I just don't see how the traffic thing that they came up with is accurate. I feel like it would be a lot more, because of just, I don't know. I just feel like the families are just gonna move in. We're just gonna have more and more people. So the affordable housing is a big thing as well. That's one of the reasons why everybody was like, it's time to move, let's sell. I did talk to a real estate agent who sold me my house. Her husband is also a contractor. I want to know their opinion about it, if they thought it was going to make our property values go down. They said the 55 and up would probably not affect it, but the affordable housing would. Definitely. And our property values are already going up, which is great. But I have a feeling it's going to start going back down, which is unfortunate because I love my home. I don't want to move. I love being the HOA president in the community, and we have some great people. And I just don't want to see everybody move because our property values start dropping. That was it.
Where is Camelot Village?
So Camelot Village is down Pearl Road. So if Pearl Road, it has like almost like a point in the, it's kind of like an L shape. So if you were to follow Pearl Road down,
Probably find a better map.
West of this, in other words?
yeah. So like it's down further there. So it would be down like down in here, further down there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually, you can see the little bit of the yellow on the bottom right there is us. So that affects us. We go in and out of that spot all the time. And that's going to be the only apartments on that side. We're all homes and townhomes. And now we're going to have apartments pop up too. I mean, we already have apartments across the street, but now we're going to start bringing apartments on our side. I don't know. I enjoy our single family and townhome side.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak in opposition? So there's an opportunity for the applicant to respond to the concerns.
Yes, the first woman who spoke, I want to respond that we actually did go to the Southeast CAC. We're right on the line dividing the south and the CAC is Rock Quarry Road. We did go to the Southeast CAC for a courtesy presentation. It was generally well received there. I mean, they did not have a vote. So, and our neighbor notice was 500 feet from the site without regard to Rock Quarry being any boundary. We did have about maybe 10 people at the neighborhood meeting. They generally were not opposed to it. They did have some traffic issues. That was the main concern they had. Again, I want to stress this is senior affordable, which is really a different thing than family. And there are regular checks that the grandma can't move her 5 teenagers in with her. She's got grandchildren. They're restricted to having them and them alone on the lease. And so there's regular confirming that that's who's in the apartment. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's bring it back to the table. Any thoughts, concerns, discussion?
I'm fine with it. I mean, I don't see that there's, and I always understand the concern when multifamily is going in near single family, but it seems to be a well laid out project, and my only concern was just the buffering between some of the townhouses that this backs up to, but as long as it's meeting code, I'm okay with it.
Well, with no further discussion or thoughts, shall we take a motion? So who would like to make a motion?
I'll move approval. And it requires a land use map amendment as well. So I'll move approval of changing the land use map from low density to moderate density. I think this kind of project is really a benefit to any community. And I don't see it as in any way detrimental to this area of Raleigh. So I think it is in the public interest.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. So moving on to the last item Old business, TC 719, infill subdivisions and recombinations. We asked the staff to go away and get more information for us about this. What? Did I say something funny?
Yes, they go away.
Sorry.
But they came back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Okay, so I'll get started. So as you mentioned, staff was asked to do our best to analyze and quantify better the potential impacts of this text change. There was just some general discussion about how wide-ranging would the impacts be across the city, given the amount of land within the city zoned R4 and R6 that this could potentially implicate. So kind of followed a three-step process. One was to identify all potentially impacted parcels, albeit with some limitations. Two, kind of testing the proposed rules and methodology on a randomized sample in both the R4 and R6 districts. And then three, extrapolating that out. So of course there are some limitations given time constraints, staff resources, and I'll touch on those. But we hope this gives a little bit better scoping of the potential impact and kind of frame it better for you all. So first part of the methodology that the comp planning division GIS analyst did was to identify all of the parcels within our R4 and R6 that fall outside of these specific exemptions, and so you can see the totals there. These are all provided in the ordinance. For sake of infill compatibility, we looked at part of a subdivision platted prior to the year 2000 as a proxy for being adjacent to a street platted prior than 20 years prior. All parcels less than 5 acres, not an NCOD, HOD, not an historic landmark, and not within a quarter mile of high-frequency transit. So here you can see just the distribution of those particular lots, and so it's a fairly large number within both R4 and R6. So the second portion was to narrow that down further, and so we looked at lots within R4 that are over a half acre that could theoretically be subdivided solely upon lot area. The information related to lot depth and lot width is a lot harder to track down. It's imperfect in terms of the data that exists within IMAPs in Wake County. So we really just focused on lot area. So that's important to note, a limitation of the kind of methodology. And then R6, looking at those over 1/3 of an acre. So lots that could potentially be subdivided based solely on lot area. Lot width and lot depth would have to be taken into consideration under any other, if they were to go through the actual subdivision process. But this was for expediency. And you can see how that narrowed it down a little bit further. So then we used kind of a random number generator to look at 20 parcels within R4 and R6 and actually ran the comparative sample methodology and analysis on those 20 lots. And as you can imagine, it's time intensive, so that's why the sample is limited. But we looked at the total number still able to subdivide after the analysis, and you can see the numbers provided there and the percentages. So again, this is 40 lots of a rather large number. So there's limitations, of course, but
And that does take into consideration lot depth and lot width?
Yeah, so at this fine-grained level, we did look at lot depth and lot width. And just to show you, this is the distribution of those 20 lots in each zoning district, so fairly good geographic distribution in terms of where they sit. But of course, there's many things that impact all of the lot parameters that would be taken into consideration. So here's just kind of the inverse. So previous was those able to subdivide. This is unable now to subdivide based on the methodology looking at the lots. So you can see the numbers and percentages. And just doing the math, here is, again, total affected parcels. That's based on lot area. And those potentially unable to subdivide if you extrapolate it out from that randomized sample amongst R4 and R6 and then the total number of lots. So just to touch on the limitations, the methodology contained within TC 719 is required to be done at a lot by lot, or excuse me, parcel by parcel level, because you have to look in the immediate vicinity and judge based on the exact parameters of those lots within the comparative sample. So, to really understand citywide would require a lot of time and resources. And that's kind of to the second point, that there was a limitation in trying to get this back to you within adequate time. We only looked at 20 lots in each zoning district. And again, lot width and lot depth were not analyzed, both kind of on the front end to figure out the number of potentially affected parcels, but they were also, they could kind of swing it either way, if that makes sense. There's that number of affected parcels could be reduced if we were to have looked at lot depth and lot width. But it also creates a further limitation when you get to actual subdivision. So that concludes my comments.
Questions for staff?
So you went through 40 of these and you did apply that 66%? That's what you did, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, God bless you. Thank you for doing that.
I'll comment, it wasn't myself, it was our GIS analyst, Ray, so.
Thanks to Ray.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for staff? All right, we did have...
Appreciate the work.
Yeah, thank you very much. We did have public comment last time, and we've also had this in the text change committee. So if we wanted to hear additional public comment today, we would have to have a vote to do that. Do the members of the commission feel like we need additional comment, or are you ready to discuss it without? All right. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak about this? And would your discussion be different from what we heard at text change committee?
Unless I don't know if the last time I said to please recommend not approving the text change, but if I did, then that would be probably.
You did say that. Okay. All right. So do we feel like we want to vote to bring anybody forward, since we have one person and they did have the opportunity to speak at text change? All right.
Does anyone want to speak for this?
I'm asking if anyone wants to speak at all. So,
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So let's discuss.
From my point of view, I'm not really clear how much staff time is saved in aggregate between looking at an NCOD versus all the individual lots that could be analyzed doing this. And the other is I do kind of have concern when we start restricting subdividing or making that arbitrary, or not arbitrary, making that decision that a lot is not able to be subdivided that's in a zoning area that would allow, that the lot would meet the lot dimensions for that. So.
Anyone else?
Well, I do understand the impulse to limit subdividing where the resulting lots would be smaller than the surrounding lots, but I also think that's what the NCOD process is for. And a community can come together and do that collectively, and I think that's an appropriate approach to this. I think doing this on a shotgun basis to limit subdividing of thousands of lots in Raleigh individually is not the right way to go. So I'm going to vote no on this.
Anyone else want to say anything?
I guess just thanks to staff, this, I think, points out some of the significant issues that this poses and constraints on by right housing as it stands right now, or possible more accessible by right housing.
So I just want to add, I've had a slight change of heart about this since our last meeting. Based on these numbers, I do believe that the numbers came out to be larger than I expected for an effect of this. And I don't think that we've had enough public input on this or public support for it. We've had very few actual citizens outside of the real estate community come forward and ask for this. And so without that kind of support, I don't feel like I can support it. So I'm prepared to move it forward without, or not recommending approval. So I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to, I guess it's not recommend approval?
Recommend denial.
Oh, I'll make a motion to recommend denial.
And anything, any
Uh,
advice on the comp plan, you know?
For reasons of simply limiting housing choices and options.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on to new business, I do want to say that we're going to switch the text changes to the end and deal with the zoning cases first. Oh, did we not want that? Because several of these zoning cases we're going to be able to move out pretty quickly, so I wanted to get those folks out of here. So the first one is text change zoning conditions case TZZ 619 Edwards Mill Road. And yes. So go ahead. Go ahead.
I know the applicant is here. I didn't see them earlier. So. This is TCD 6-19. The address is 2923 Edwards Mill Road. This is to amend the conditions associated with zoning case Z-8-18. Again, the address is 2923 Edwards Mill Road. This is the site here. It's off of Edwards Mill, but it also borders to the east Blue Ridge Road, just to get you oriented with the site. There are three conditions that currently govern the property. They generally regulate the use, office, and retail use, square footage, residential dwelling unit limitation, and the requirements for the parking limited standards for new construction. The petitioner is requesting to remove the requirement for the parking limited standards.
So they can't offer.
That condition currently states, any site plan for new construction on the subject property shall meet the parking limited standards containing UDO section 3.4.5 with the exception of the height limitations. There are no other conditions that are being requested for amendment. Just to give you a side-by-side comparison, to the left there you have the current conditions, to the right is what is proposed with the strike-through of condition number 3. They are scheduled to go to the November 12th CAC meeting, which is this evening, for Northwest CAC. They've been there to present the item, and tonight they are expected to receive a vote on this item. Just to give you a little bit of background on this, the parking limited standards are intended for areas where access to buildings by automobile is desired, but where some level of walkability is maintained. These standards permit a maximum of 2 bays of on-site parking with single drive aisle between the building and the street right-of-way. General building types, which is what is being proposed for this site, are permitted and should have a primary street-facing entrance. The building width at the primary build-to is a minimum of 50% and a minimum of 25% at the side build-to. The applicant has stated a few reasons within their statement of support for wanting this condition removed, And based on conversations that I've had with the applicant in the past, one of those primary concerns seems to be the placement of the building on the site and whether they can meet these percentages. With the removal of this condition, they would fall back to the general conditions that are on the underlying zoning, which would give them, which are a little bit more flexible for them in regard to the building setback, and that's what they hope to achieve on this site. Again, they would fall back to the standards that are in section 3.2.5 for general buildings. Again, the applicant is here to probably give you a little bit more detail on about what they want specifically from this removal of this condition. With that, staff is available for any questions.
Questions for staff?
What are the standards for general buildings in 3.2.5?
Well, the building standards, you have a primary, from the primary street, the building would have to be set back 5 feet. And for a side street, it would be 5 feet as well. Now, this property is somewhat unique in that it will have frontage on 4 sides, because it's a piece of this overall parcel that's being carved out for this particular development. So there will be a new street placed in to the north with this construction, so they will have street frontage on 4 sides. And the parking setbacks for this would be 10 feet from primary street and from side street.
No, I'm just.
So if there's any parking in between the building and the street, it has to be 10 feet back?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? All right, let's bring the applicant forward.
Good morning, Mac Paul, 421 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of UNC Rex Hospital. Got Brian O'Haver with Stewart Engineering working on the administrative site review right now. And I'd just like to preface my comments. I think we would like to request that this be held for 2 weeks because of the CAC vote and because of some conversations we're having ongoing with the Blue Ridge Road Alliance, which Rex is a very major stakeholder and member of. But I would, if you would indulge just a little bit of conversation and feedback that you might have on some of the frontage issues. We spent a lot of time, those of you who were here last September, this was rezoned to this zoning that's currently in place. And we had a lot of conversation through that process of dealing with this frontage issue. And we had conditions that very specifically spelled out the relationships of the buildings to Blue Ridge Road. We have a very specific plan, a cancer center that is very urgent in terms of a time frame, and we were anticipating as soon as that zoning was approved last fall, we go into site plan, and now we're way behind schedule, and we've had just a series of meetings with the city. And what has transpired as we went through the zoning process, it became clear that we were concerned about some of the very specific percentages and whether we would meet that. So we decided in consultation with staff to go to the general parking limited standard. So we converted it to just a pure OX 12 PL. Right at the last minute, and we were in a kind of a time crunch to get to the hearing, staff pointed out rightly that you can't, for whatever reason, PL does not allow greater than 7 stories. So the suggestion was made, okay, we'll put it into just take the PL condition and put it into the zoning condition rather than having a standalone frontage. And that's what we did. The reason we went with a frontage rather than having the very specific percentages in the zoning condition was that it would afford us latitude to get administrative alternates or deal with all kind of the site-specific issues during the site plan process that we knew we couldn't envision. It's a 4-sided lot. We don't know where the designations are. So we knew that there could be a myriad of issues that would come up that we would just address through the normal course. But what has transpired is there have been text changes that have tightened up or essentially made it illegal or impossible to get an administrative alternate or a design adjustment or a variance, all of which we've pursued to address these frontage issues if it's in a zoning condition. So a lot of conversation with staff led to today, and we very much appreciate the efforts to move this quickly. I mean, it's moved very quickly in terms of getting this text changed before you today, which is one reason the CAC vote is tonight. We haven't had the CAC vote. But what I would say to you, we met with the Blue Ridge Alliance last night, and not the full meeting. They have a full meeting on Thursday, so I don't think they would want me to represent the people we met with. We're speaking on behalf of the entire alliance, but the leadership. And they very much would love or would like for us to still include some language in this condition that specifically addresses the relationships of the buildings to Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge is the kind of the urban corridor. This site also has frontage on Edwards Mill, which has, steep topo, and has the importance of Blue Ridge. So I think we do have an approach. We would come back in 2 weeks. We'll meet with them Thursday. And it would be basically what we were looking at doing previously when we went through the zoning case, but now, I guess in light of the site review process, we kind of know what we can meet and what we can't meet, and there is no parking between the building and the street. The building is up on the street. The issues are, there's a corner lot requirement, and there's a very strange contour to Blue Ridge, and we can't quite get the building all the way up to the corner. And then we have, as it relates to another street, a side street is where we have some parking. So, again, the building's up on Blue Ridge, but there's some parking on the side of the building, which is a problem without the administrative alternate. So I'd like to if you have questions or feedback, there's a lot of anxiety on the part of Rex that this project has fallen behind schedule. So we're trying to, once we're ready, to try to move it as quickly as we can.
Do I remember correctly, this is a 4-story building, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, we had, it's zoned for 12, whether they ever use the 12 or not, but it's a large campus. The Hart Center that was built is actually pretty tall on the other side of the street, so there's, potential one day with another building.
Good morning, Brian O'Haver, 223 Southwest Street, Raleigh, 27603. If I could just add, Mac's comment about the urgency. This process has delayed this project about 4 months to date. So the fact that the hospital is willing to take another 2 weeks to make sure we're trying to address all the issues with the BRCA, I want to make sure that's clear. The other thing, and maybe it'll be helpful in 2 weeks to bring the master plan, we worked very diligently with the BRCA initially to create an urban plan. There's been things that have transpired. We anticipated administrative alternates. Tika and Bob, you know those very well. And you may remember that 30 by 30 corner. I think we looked at probably a dozen of those that just couldn't be met. Those are part of the issues that now we had anticipated we'd be able to address, but we can't. And so again, I think just the urgency, I think the hospital's willingness to work with the BRCA 4 months behind, those are real dollars, real time, and real patients with cancer that aren't being treated. So I just want to add that out. Hospital's doing everything we can. We're working with the BRCA. The plan is very urban. It's very walkable. There are just some issues that are creating some complications. So,
Thank you. Any questions for the applicants?
One, what is it that the Alliance, what type of address to the street are they looking for? I'm just kind of curious.
I think they really just want anything in a condition that would specify some relationship. What they're most concerned about, as we all deal with in these contexts, is precedent. As you may know, I mean, there have been other projects on that Blue Ridge corridor where they've struggled to get the owner to comply with this vision. And yes, I mean, Rex is a healthcare large need, but they're just feeling like if they keep making exceptions, and they would just love to have some kind of language that they can point to say, hey, they agreed to following this frontage, even if it doesn't meet every single aspect of the frontage. I think they just want to have some language.
and I think, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but we're just shy of the build to anyways. I mean, the majority of the building is up along Blue Ridge Road. So again, previously there was a mechanism through the administrative alternate to deal with that. But so again, they're meeting the intent, but they're not meeting the actual percentage. And to Mac's point, I think they're just concerned about setting precedent. So again, the hospital being a good neighbor says, okay, let's continue to work on this. But I can just tell you from experience, the majority of the building is along Blue Ridge Road, and the intent of the code is, in my opinion, absolutely being met, so.
Brian and I were on the appearance commission together, and we dealt with a lot of these build-to issues. That's not possible anymore?
Use your microphone, please.
It's not possible to get that alternate
Well,
anymore?
with the standard being in a zoning condition, there has been a text change that you can't get an alternate to a zoning condition.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, we have 3 minutes and 48 seconds for anybody here in support. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak in support of this TCZ? Is there anyone here that wishes to speak in opposition? All right, the applicant has asked for this case to be tabled for 2 weeks, and we will do that. Thank you.
Good, yeah, I'm sure you can, well, I'm not sure. It seems like you can write out a condition, a changed condition that is similar to what you started with, right? And you know how to do that.
Yeah, Bob, and that's what we're going to do. I think, again, the issue is just the timing. And again, as Max said, thanks to staff, and there's a lot of folks really working hard to push this forward. So I think that's really just a sense of urgency to keep this moving forward.
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other closing remarks for the applicants? I didn't give you a chance. All right, thank you very much. So the next, Z3319 has already been deferred, so we have Z3319 and Z3419 and Z3519, and both of those are waiting for a CAC vote, and I wanted to see if there's anybody here to speak about them to see if we can just defer them until the CAC vote. So are you the applicant?
Molly Stewart, 421 Fayetteville Street.
Okay.
Yes, I represent the applicants in both of those matters. As you may hear today. In one case in particular, there is some urgency to getting a vote, and also some very good reasons that we haven't made it there yet. I would love the opportunity to request a vote today.
It's unlikely that we would vote without a CAC vote. So I don't know what your preference is up here at the table. Is there anybody that would want to move forward? I mean, that is not our procedure to move forward without a CAC vote. So when is your CAC meeting for your vote?
It will be next Thursday, the 21st.
So we could hear you on the 26th. Mr. Bowers, did you have a comment? I just saw you reaching. Does anyone feel differently?
No. I'm thrilled that something's going to happen with the Capitol Hotel. Hopefully it's removal. So that's good.
Right.
And then the property behind is interesting. But I do think the CAC should have a chance to discuss it, and if there are neighborhood concerns, they can be brought out there, and we won't know about them unless they are.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, I guess two things. One, I guess Ken or Travis, it's not technically our procedure, it's our custom.
Correct.
Oh, and I was
Yes.
going to say, I think that your practice has been, is that when the applicant would like to move forward and the board wants to defer, it's just for the board to vote on that. That's what you've done in the past.
I understand.
But, yeah.
All right, so we
But
will
it's
need to
not
vote to defer because the applicant is asking for us to move on and vote, move
I
on and
wasn't
vote.
clear which case that was, if it was one
Which
of the-
which case is the one that you're feeling some urgency about?
In particular, it is Z35.
Z35.
I'm just curious to know, what is the sense of urgency?
Sure. So Z35 is the Capitol Boulevard Hotel. The applicant there, Alliance Residential, they are targeting that for market rate but affordable housing, targeting 80% AMI. And simply, when they came in and looked at this site initially, they thought that this was a site that only needed a site plan and that they could move quickly on it and minimize cost. They found during that process, as you may have heard before, that there is a zoning condition on that site that prevents multifamily residential. And so they've had to go back to get the rezoning, to get rid of that condition. And so that's already been kind of a huge delay. And because of the urgency in keeping that delay to a minimum, given the notice request, they did their neighborhood meeting as soon as possible, submitted the petition the following day, the first day they're permitted to, and then actually attended their first CAC meeting the day following that. It just turns out that the Atlantic CAC does not meet in October, and they weren't able to get that second meeting in before we were able to come here.
Do you have any other deadlines, like tax credit or anything like that?
No.
What would it be if we listened to this as allowed it, to come forward in its full presentation?
I mean, we can certainly do that, but the CAC hasn't finished their process, so they haven't had time to finish their discussion. And what would happen is that we would have to decide whether we're willing to vote on it without a CAC vote, and typically we haven't done that.
Would our discussion help the CAC?
It depends on whether there's someone here from the CAC, but typically we have waited and let the CAC vote. So is there anyone here in the audience who's representing from the public that wants to speak on either of these cases?
Is this in regards to both the hotel and the patch of woods behind it?
We're asking about both right now.
I would like to talk about the patch of woods behind it.
All right, so that's 34, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. Well, I was hoping to move these along so we could get on to our text changes, but we can do the full presentations of both if you prefer. So what's your pleasure?
Well, my preference is to wait for a CAC vote.
Mine is as well. I think there will be some issues with 34. I don't know of any issues yet with 35, but there may be some. And we'll find that out when the CAC meets and when we have our discussion. I did have a question about affordable housing, but you're telling me this is an affordable project, so.
Market rate affordable, yes.
Yeah. Market rate affordable, what does that mean?
Yeah, so so without an actual control on the rent, there is no condition about that proposed. It's simply something that Alliance Residential does is in their planning to target that 80% AMI.
Oh, okay.
Non-tax credit.
Yeah, anything north of that 60% AMI is not going to be restricted by any other governance.
Right.
Okay. So we have one person here that wanted to speak. Can you hold for 2 weeks?
There was another person here, he had to go to work.
All right, so can you come back in 2 weeks, or can you provide or provide your feedback at the CAC?
Knowing how long these processes take now, I'll make sure to take time off of work as well.
Okay.
And let him know, so I can wait.
Okay, great. So is there anybody here that wants to try to go forward? We need to vote, so at least on 35.
Well, 35, I mean, I was reviewing it, and I mean, it's really just, it seems like it's one condition. There's a change in frontage, but I mean, it's the same height, it's the same base zoning, and it's separate from, I mean, and the CAC didn't vote last month. I mean, they had an opportunity to vote on it when it was presented initially.
But they typically don't vote the first meeting. They get the presentation and then vote the second
Because I
meeting.
think it's more so like a fact-finding mission to figure out all that's going on and then discuss. And in October, they do not meet because of the Raleigh Citizens Advisory Council Awards. So that's typically why they don't, because it falls within the same line.
So,
Okay.
So let's do one case at a time. So Z3419, you're okay with us tabling that for 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay, so we're tabling Z3419, which is the woods behind the house. So we'll see that again in 2 weeks. Z3519, do we want to make a motion to vote to hold this for 2 weeks, or do we want to hear it?
I haven't really heard why this is urgent to get this approved today. I agree with Matt. The issue, green frontage strikes me as a good thing, so I don't see that you're facing any great obstacles with it. But it is customary for us to let the CAC discuss the case and vote on it before we take it up. So why, again, should we not do that?
Sure, and we're not aware of any obstacles either. As we mentioned, it has been discussed at CAC as well as the neighborhood meeting. There were not great concerns, some talk about traffic, which I could give you more details about. But in general, there is excitement for this project. So that is not a driving factor. It's really coming down to the fact that this applicant came in for a site plan and just really wanted to move quickly, get this done, minimize the cost, and maintain that affordable level. So kind of already being thrown back into the rezoning process has hurt that goal, and so we're just working to get it through as quickly as possible.
I guess I was just trying to say, as a consideration, understanding that the rear property has more, like, the meeting's next week, so council will have that information. I don't know, as a consideration, it seems like it's a very, very,
cut and dried is
yeah,
what you're looking
yeah,
for.
yes, yeah.
Okay. Well,
But-
I don't disagree with that, but I don't also see any compelling reason to vary from our practice here.
So are you going to make the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the
We have done
motion
that
to
before.
defer for 2 weeks, and I think your applicants can be comfortable that they're going to be approved in 2 weeks.
So you made a,
That's not a guarantee, obviously. Somebody may, at the CAC, there may be some issues that we haven't thought of.
so you made a motion.
To defer for 2 weeks.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, three noes. Okay, so we're tabling for 2
noes.
weeks.
Thank you.
Voted no?
Jennifer, CJ, and Matt.
All right.
All right, so moving back to the text change TC 619, design alternatives to Article 8.3.
Thank you. While we get ready with our presentation, I'd like to offer some introductory remarks on this item. When we adopted the Unified Development Ordinance back in 2013, we introduced a series of new regulations into the code. One set of those regulations were related to our public improvements, so street rights-of-way, streetscapes adjacent to the right-of-way. Along with that, we introduced new processes. One such process was called a design adjustment. And while the Planning Commission doesn't deal with those directly, you do have conversation about that, typically in the context of zoning conditions. So if an applicant wants some relief on one of our block perimeter standards, which is one of those new standards in Chapter 8, there's an opportunity to offer a zoning condition. And so the Planning Commission has and does have conversations about the street network and the grid as it relates to rezoning requests. So as recently as the spring, staff and city planning started reviewing some of these design adjustment standards in Chapter 8, and we came to the collective conclusion that as written, the text provides a little bit more subjectivity in decision-making. And as you know, that's not something that staff is allowed to engage in when reviewing administrative approvals. We are required to only look at objective standards and apply objective standards to site plans. So through that discussion, the city staff asked for authorization to amend the code, and we're trying to accomplish this in three different parts. The first, you've already seen, it was a text change earlier this year that took the administrative design adjustments and sent them to the Board of Adjustment. This is the second part, which is focusing on Article 8.3, that's blocks, lots, cross-access, where the standards would be altered so that staff can make objective standards or objective decisions based on objective standards with an appeal path to the Board of Adjustment. So this has been a longstanding discussion item for staff in city planning, development services, and the city attorney's office. In addition, there has been a great partnership with the Development Services Advisory Committee. We call them DSAC. It's the self-selected group of industry professionals that provide feedback for us related to development. and the process of development. So we have shared this language with the selected DSAC members and had multiple discussions with them about the changes that we're envisioning here today. I would note that, number one, these changes I believe are favorably received, and you'll hear that later on today. The users of this language, being both city staff and the industry professionals, agree that this path forward is appropriate and is warranted. So we see this as a success story in altering the code in a manner for all of our users moving forward. With that, I'll let David York, who's been consulting with us on this project, run through some of the more details of this proposal. A number of different folks here sitting at the table or in the audience were involved in the crafting of this language, so we can answer any questions that you might have at the conclusion of his presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. David York with Fox Rothschild, 434 Fayetteville Street, Suite 2800. I was asked to assist the city in drafting several text amendments to address the issues regarding design adjustments, and so I drew the short straw. So no, anyway, to follow up on what Travis has indicated, the TC6 is sort of hopefully the longer term fix. TC2 is the short term fix, which took what staff was doing administratively and applying subjective standards and moved it to the Board of Adjustment. TC6 is to try to develop objective standards, which can be applied administratively by staff to limit the application of sections in Article 8.3. And so that's what I'll help you go through today. Just so you have an idea, we're dealing with block perimeter maximums, street stubs, cross access, dead-end street lengths. That's what the requirements of the code are that these design adjustments in 8.3 relate to. Over the last 4 months, the Board of Adjustment under TC2 has been looking at these design adjustments. Daniel King and Catherine Hill have done an evaluation, and with TC6, which is right now seeing in the last 4 months some 65 cases of design adjustments. Or not cases, but requests. Some of these requests are multiple for one case. 65% of those were block perimeter related. So the bulk of them are block perimeter. 21.5% were cross access. So even though we still have a couple of more articles in the code to deal with, Article 8.3 deals with the bulk of what's going on at the Board of Adjustment on design adjustments. Excuse me. Okay, so what does TC3 do? It creates these objective standards that limits the application of the code to avoid sort of no-brainer application. And so that's done by a few methods. What I'd like to do is draw your attention to the text amendment itself. If you'll look at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, you'll see a table of the actual proposed ordinance. The table currently exists, which tells when and how the block perimeter and dead-end street maximum lengths are applied. TC6 proposes adding a third column, which is a minimum site area. And so depending on the intensity of the development of the zoning district, you have different size minimum requirements, so that if your property that you're developing is below this minimum, then the block perimeter, dead-end streets, they don't apply, okay? So that's the first big chunk that we were able to remove from application. Right above the table in section 832A 2B you'll see we're recommending that if you have a block that's split zoned, the current reading of the code is the most restrictive applies. We're suggesting in TC6 the least restrictive applies. And we have a few slides later, we'll have a block that I think is a good example that shows how these proposed changes would have effect. Another change, because we still have design adjustments from Article 8.4 and 8.5 that are going to the Board of Adjustment, we're changing the name of these design adjustments to design alternates, okay? Because there's still going to be an outlet to go to the Board of Adjustment. We try to come up with objective standards that would catch everything. We found that nearly impossible. So we feel like it's still practical to have an outlet. And since 8.4 and 8.5 design adjustments are still going to the Board of Adjustment, we're keeping, for the time being, 8.3 design alternates with the Board of Adjustment, if that makes sense. And if you all have questions, please interrupt me at any time. We've created sort of by right exemptions based on the physical characteristics of the property. The first of which is this minimum site area size that was added to the table. We've also added that if you were to put a connecting street in to try to shorten the perimeter of a block, if it didn't result in a reduction of at least 20%, you aren't required to make it. Also,
20% of the overall
of the max. Yeah, because the block perimeter is a maximum length. Yeah. And so if you didn't reduce it by more than 20%, your property's probably not the property to fix the problem, is basically what that evaluation is. And if you didn't result in a new block that was at least 50% of the standard, then your property's probably not the property to fix that block. And so that's what those types of conditions are looking for. Another was if the new street would consume 15% of the subject property or the adjacent property that it stubbed into. Felt like that was too much of a taking. And so.
One quick question. Did you say that you have some visuals?
Yes.
That can, okay.
I will pull up, I mean, we can skip the by right exemptions. We have a few slides that just
I just wasn't
enumerate
sure
them.
if they related to the visuals to help make more sense of it.
We have one block that demonstrates at least 7 of these objective standards. The parcel in question is highlighted in red. It's just under an acre. The block is approximately 3,800 feet, and it's split zoned, okay? So first off, because we now have a minimum site area for the applicability, the fact that the corner lot here is less than an acre, it would be kicked out, and so it wouldn't have to comply with block perimeter, okay? If a road were cut through north and south to create a new block, given the proximity of this corner lot, even if you extended it all the way to the north, you're not going to fix the problem by more than 20%, and you're going to end up with a lot that's less than 50% of the maximum, okay? You also have an extension of a road to a residentially zoned property that has a detached house on less than 2 acres. That's another one of the exceptions. We've got these listed out. So we would go from least restrictive because it's a split zone lot. And so instead of applying a 3,000 foot block perimeter maximum, it would be a 4,500 foot block perimeter. The new street stub goes straight into a detached structure. It would eat up more than 15% of the subject property or the adjacent property. The block was created before the UDO was adopted, and it's less than 150% of the maximum perimeter that's required under the current code. And again, the new street would create a block that's less than 50%, and it wouldn't reduce by more than 20% or result in a conforming. The seventh one is that it's below the minimum site size. These are the criteria for block perimeter. Not just these 7, there's more. If you're up against a railroad track, if DOT is required to issue a driveway permit and they don't, if it's another land use such as a detached house, if it's going into a school, if it's going into TCA, if it's going into, if it's going to require you to cross a stream or a creek that drains I think it's a mile area. So they're not going to make you cross the Neuse River for block perimeter. They're not going to make you cross railroad tracks for block perimeter. They're not going to make you buy access to a controlled access highway, those kind of things. And so all of those are no-brainers that staff was administering administratively, but because the criteria in the code were subjective, they didn't have the authority to do it. And so that's what the Board of Adjustment is hearing, and that's why we feel like a large portion of the cases that are going to the BOA now for this will now be handled administratively and fairly quickly. Cross-access deals with driveways, so they have similar, not identical, but similar exceptions to them. Stub streets have similar, not exactly identical, but similar exceptions to them as well. Happy to go through those to the extent you want them to. The sooner we get this text amendment moved forward, the sooner we can save the city time and resources, the Board of Adjustment time and resources, and the applicants time and resources. It's my understanding that the City Council has already scheduled a public hearing for December 3rd. Right. So we're here to answer your questions and help you move this along as quickly as possible.
I was just going to say, it seems like this has been vetted by all the parties that deal with this on a daily and weekly basis. And I know that it's been a tremendous headache. So I feel like I don't think that there's anything that any of us are going to be able to contribute to this. All the minds that need to work on this have worked on it. And I think that I fully support just moving it forward.
Well, and I have to say, I spent a fair amount of time reading this over and over this weekend to make sure that I understood what was going on. And I also am very comfortable with it. I had some questions about the conditions that were listed, and you've covered some of the conditions here in the block perimeter and in the cross-access about how they were vetted. I see some of that is done here, so I saw there was some backup, but some of them, like the sealed traffic study being submitted, were a little bit confusing to me, but I feel like probably the right people have been involved in that, so I don't need to get down into the nitty-gritty of that detail personally. But at any rate, we do need to hear from the public, because we haven't done that yet, but we have time to hear the staff. The city and the applicant are the same, so if we have questions for staff or for Mr. York, we can go ahead and do that before we hear from the public. So are there any questions?
I have one question, maybe clarification, and you can probably tell me more quickly than I can research it. Block perimeter, number 9, I'm wondering why there isn't any language that would include like multi-unit that's on a small scale, that's like an infill lot, and maybe that doesn't qualify as the attached or detached residential, or can a cottage court be applied to that? I'm wondering if some of those smaller.
Those are normally located on smaller lots.
Yeah.
And if they are, then they would be kicked out by the minimum site area. The cottage, is cottage a separate building type that we would need to include, or is that a type of detached?
Yeah, the building type for cottage courts is attached or detached.
So I think that would still catch it as well.
Okay.
But again, we're happy for improvement.
Yeah,
If you all have something, by all means, throw it out there. But we've tried real hard to come up with sort of the no-brainer cases.
Right. So some multifamily tracts are quite large, and you might still want to stub a street because they may be reconfigured or redeveloped at some point in the future, and therefore there would be an opportunity to get connectivity through there. We've certainly seen that for many of the area plans we've looked at on where we tried to examine connectivity in more micro area. We're seeing older 60s and 70s apartment tracts that might redevelop, and there's an opportunity to improve connectivity.
And we have the condition that if the existing improvements on the adjacent property exceed if the value of the existing improvements on an adjacent property exceed the value of the land. That was created as this is less likely to redevelop soon. If you've got improvements that are worth less than the value of the dirt, then they're more likely to be redeveloped quickly. And so that's why that's yet another carve out. So if you had a project that was a small parcel but had multi-units on there, those units probably exceed the value of the land.
So does that resolve your
I think so. Thank you.
All right.
other questions for the staff applicant? All right, let's move on to hearing from the public. So the public has 10 minutes, 2 minutes per. Those in support may start.
Good morning, Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946, Raleigh 27602. Just want to say briefly that this is a step in the right direction. It probably does not go far enough. I've had maybe 15 block perimeter requests before the Board of Adjustment in the last few months, and my clients are not happy about it. Some call it a lawyer's relief act, but I don't like to have to bring this request over and over, and most of the time there's absolutely no way they can comply. They don't own any property other than their subject property, and they don't own the property through which a connecting road would be. So I think it's a step in the right direction. It probably doesn't go far enough, but I know, having conversations with City Attorney's Office and Mr. York, that more is coming, which will be much welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. New 2 minutes.
I guess it's afternoon now, so I think I said good morning earlier, but good afternoon,
It's not
Ryan
noon
O'Haver.
yet.
Not
Don't
quite.
scare us like that.
Okay, that's an old
It's 11. It's 11 something.
223 Southwest Street, Raleigh 27603. Matt, before you step out, I appreciate your comments. This has been vetted. I've personally been involved with the DSAC and with staff and with Mr. York through two-hour sessions of looking at just this language. And it is complicated. It's hard to legislate design. And I just want to echo what Isabel just mentioned. There's more coming forward. It probably doesn't go far enough, but I just want to remind folks that when we started this process back in 2013, maybe even sooner on the new code, I was part of a city council advisory board, and we met weekly with the consultant for a period of about 2 months. Bob, you know my penchant for this type of pain. I love this stuff. And what's frustrating is we identified a lot of these issues as folks in the community who deal with this stuff in and out. I think Ms. Jeffries, you might have said that. And we pointed out these issues 6-7 years ago, and were ignored, quite frankly. And some of you may have heard me, I say this as often as I can, even to council. We knew these issues were coming. We identified them 7 years ago. They didn't heed our warning. And there's more coming. Mr. York's doing a great job with staff. A lot of hard work is going into this. So I'm just up here to speak in support, let you know that people smarter than me have been looking at this, and there's more coming, and it's essential. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Anybody else that wants to speak in support?
Suzanne Harris, Home Builders Association, Raleigh-Wake County. I fortunately was not personally too involved with this text change because it's probably a lot of specificities that I don't have a great knowledge on. And fortunately, members of my association are involved with the Development Services Advisory Committee and have been involved in the meetings that were mentioned. And so I'm very grateful for their work. I know, as Isabel mentioned, a lot of work has gone into it, but it's a step in the right direction. That's the feedback that I'm getting, that there's still more to be done to make improvements, but I am in support of what has been done so far and appreciate all the work that's gone into it, both from staff and those in the community who've been involved. Thank you.
Thank you. We have room for 2 more. Anybody else want to come speak in support? Anyone want to come forward and speak in opposition? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. Any further discussion or concerns or questions?
Block perimeter has been a head scratcher for me since I got on the planning commission. It gets waived in rezoning cases by the applicant frequently. I do think we have some pretty big blocks in Raleigh. That said, this doesn't go very far, so this is accepting small lots as near as I can tell. I think perhaps we should be looking at strengthening the block perimeter standards for bigger projects, but this is dealing with the other end of the tunnel. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you can think of the tests that are put here as attempting to try to codify 4 considerations. Is it physically feasible to construct a new street somewhere? So is there something obstructing that you can't cross in the way? Is the new connection meaningful? Does it meaningfully improve connectivity? So that's where that reduction of 20% or conforming blocks, et cetera. Is it reasonable to ask of the applicant to do it? And so the site size and the amount of land area that could be consumed by the street or kind of fits on that. And then the last one is the compatibility issue. Are you connecting things that should not be connected? And, you know, that's where the stubbing into someone's backyard, clarifying that that's not going to happen.
Right. So I read this once. I can't say that I studied it with the greatest of care, but I looked for any reason to object to it, and I couldn't find one. So I'm going to prepare to vote yes.
Any further discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve that this is consistent with the relevant policies and the comprehensive plan, and it's in the public's best interest to move this forward.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is passed unanimously. We're moving on to TC. Oh, thank you, Mr. York, for all the work that you put in and for all of those folks that have put in lots of work on this. So, sorry, I was remiss in saying that before. So we're moving on to the next text change, which is TC 1319, building height.
Thanks. So I'm going to just provide a little history on this. Of course, it's come before the commission and also a special subcommittee of the commission before, but for those who may not have been involved and for those who need a little bit of a refresher, I'm just going to go through the history and kind of where it's ended up at each step in terms of the actual text and where we're at now that a text change has been authorized by the City Council. So originally this originated, the idea for a text change through a petition of citizens that there were some developers who were concerned that the way building, the limitations on building height, both in terms of stories and feet, made it difficult in certain instances to construct Class A office space, modern Class A office space that requires somewhat larger floor-to-floor heights within a building. So it was originally reviewed by GNR, the Growth and Natural Resources Committee of the City Council, and then referred to Planning Commission for further study. The commission in 2018 created a special height subcommittee and provided a recommendation back to the City Council in October 2018. City Council again referred to GNR, and then they provided their final recommendation back to the council in September of 2019, and the council then authorized a text change. So just to recap generally, the problem, as stated earlier, is really related to taller buildings and limiting floor-to-floor height per story. And you can see here, kind of running the numbers based upon the current standards, which regulate both stories and feet. For taller buildings, you end up with smaller story heights at the upper levels. And so there's some flexibility that was wanted by developers. And so staff, particularly the UDC, looked at a range of different options, and those were reviewed in the special subcommittee previously. They looked specifically at 7-story zoning adjacent to residential properties, because it's really these taller buildings where this comes into play, and they wanted to ensure that this didn't create significant issues if you're to relax height standards near residential property. Looked at removal of feet in height above 7 stories, increasing in the measurement of feet in height for certain size buildings to provide some additional flexibility, and then also the impact of FAR, which is kind of a metric that's used in other zoning codes and jurisdictions. So that's just a general recap. So the subcommittee review voted to increase the measurement in feet for 7-story buildings and eliminate the measurement in feet for buildings 12 stories and taller. So that was their kind of recommendation or settling point. So then when it moved to the full commission, there was some kind of additional discussion and a divergence from that recommendation. They looked to remove the feet in height for structures 7 stories and above, as you can see there, and increasing the feet in height for 4- and 5-story buildings to provide some of those buildings with, or some of those buildings with additional flexibility, but not eliminating the height measurement altogether. And then when it came to GNR, they evaluated kind of the full commission's opinion. There was some additional discussion about generally looking at massing, about the size of a building as it relates to height, but ultimately, staying within the scope of what was recommended from the commission and how this all originated. They looked only at, a straight modification to measurement in feet for buildings 7 stories and above, and their recommendation was to keep the existing feet measurement for 5 stories and below. And so this is what was settled upon by GNR and then went to the council in September, and thus has been authorized. And as you guys may be aware, there was also language added to just strengthen the existing interpretation that structured parking count towards the maximum number of stories. So you'll see that modification in the text change, and that's just to codify what had already been the working interpretation of staff. So that concludes my presentation and recap. Happy
Questions
to answer
for
any
staff?
questions.
I had just a simple one. Being a part of those conversations, I was curious why the pushback to the 75 feet on a 5-story building from the 80. What was the particular reasoning or rationale behind that?
I'm not certain there was a particular rationale. It just through discussion, The council committee felt like that was not an appropriate change to make.
Just, okay.
Any other questions? All right, so so the city's the applicant, right? So we now need to hear from the public. Is there anybody here that wants to speak in support? Please come forward. You have 2 minutes. Please state your name and address when you get to the podium.
Dennis Pilarczyk. Geez, I'm really close. Sorry. 101 Great Oak Drive. I actually live in Garner. I work for the American Institute of Steel Construction, and I do market development for them, also a licensed structural engineer. I just want to speak a little bit on the design considerations that we find that kind of tie into this. When I've spoken with engineers and architects and developers who have this height restriction along with the story restriction. And because of that, they're starting to have more concrete design instead of steel design, which, you know, I'm biased because I work for the American Institute of Steel Construction, but the point is they're not able to give a look at multiple different options for the framing system. So it's not going to be a win for everything's going to go steel now or anything like that, but now they can at least look at a steel option as well as the concrete option for these buildings because they do have a little bit more leeway in the actual framing depth between the floors. So that's a little caveat that might not have been, it's not just about the Class A office space, there are framing considerations as well.
So you're speaking in support?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry,
thank
yes,
you. All right.
100%.
All right, thank you. Anybody else here that wishes to speak? I can't see if there's any, I don't think there's anybody else in the audience, except Mr. Braun, who's joined us today. Okay, so let's bring it back to the table for discussion.
Well, one thing that I get excited about with this is that we might not have an entire skyline of just flat buildings. So,
would you care to make a motion? I think I think everybody's just ready.
I
So,
move approval.
with, do we need justification?
Yeah, this one you're advising on whether it's reasonable and public interest consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Move approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. We have completed new business. Moving on to the approval of minutes. I did have an item for the, hang on, I got to get down to my notes, for the Planning Commission minutes on the 22nd, the Tarboro Road item Z2619 said that case was deferred to the 12th of November. I believe it was the 26th of November. They didn't show up here today, so yeah. Other than that, I am good with it. So does anyone else have any questions, concerns about the minutes? I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to the minutes from the 24th. Any comments, concerns? A motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The report from the chair. Is that right? Is that me now? Okay. So I'll be away on the 26th, and Mr. Geary will be away on the 26th, so Ms. Hicks, you will be chairing that meeting. Is there anybody else that will not be here on the 26th? So is that a maybe?
No, I'm not.
I'm sorry.
I will not be here also.
You will not be here. So we have to have 6 people to have a quorum. So I'm just hearing from Mr. Tomasulo that.
I'm okay, actually.
Okay, so we have 6 people. So we will be depending on you to be here on the 26th. So please do show up. Try not to get sick. Everybody I know is getting sick.
I'll come anyway.
I want to thank you guys for getting the website up to date. I did go out and look, and the dates are right for everybody, and the subcommittees are right for everybody. So thank you so much for doing that and taking care of that. And that's it from me. So do we have any reports from the members? From Ms.
I have a question, and possibly Ken will answer it when he speaks. The comp plan updates, are they approved yet? And if so, have we updated the comp plan so that I could read what we did?
Okay. So some but not all, which from a publishing standpoint has made it difficult to update the document, but I believe we are. If you go into the online version, I think some of those updates are reflected in the flipping book version of it and the PDFs that are available. I'd have to double check. I don't know if any. John, do you have a better handle on where we are in the publishing?
From what I've heard indirectly is the goal is to have retain the blue version flipping book, but basically say which parts have been adopted in the web page itself for the comprehensive plan update, so to not have a hybrid flipping book at any point, to just keep it two separate and just tell people what's adopted and what's not. So that updates will be made to the web page as things are adopted.
All right. So there's some chance that the remaining items will be adopted this month, at which point we could publish a unified version in the new format.
Okay. And, all right. Will it be clear to me, I can't say that I've done this yet, so when I do it, will it be clear what changes we made or just changes that were made?
Well, to reconstruct, we have documentation of what the Planning Commission recommended, and we have documentation as to which of those the City Council approved. Then City Council has made additional changes, which have also been documented. Yeah. But if you'll excuse us, we're not proposing to put yet another reconciliation of all this together. So if you want to track something, you would have to go through those layers of documentation to do it.
But they are available to go through?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We went so fast on some of those things.
We went fast.
Struggle to remember what it was we approved and what we didn't.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking.
Great.
All right. Any other reports from the members? Okay. The report from our planning director.
Okay. So at the November 6th council meeting, there were 6 items approved, including 2 of the comp plan amendment clusters, coordinating land use and transportation, which was CP2B19, and Greenprint Raleigh Sustainable Development, which is CP2D19. Z1619 Fayetteville Street, which is the rezoning case for the historic block, was approved. 2 zoning condition text changes, TCZ 119 on Spring Forest and TCZ 219 on Durley were approved, and the Cottage Court text change, TC 618, was approved. CP 1019, which was the Falls of the News Parkway designation, was approved with the modifications that you recommended. So they accepted your recommendation. 2 items have been referred to a work session, which is happening today at 4 o'clock, November 12th. CP2C19, which is the Economic and Prosperity and Equity comp plan sections, and CP2E19, Growing Successful Neighborhoods and Communities, both approved. Is there an update?
Cottage Court was not approved, it was held.
I'm sorry, Cottage Court was held, not approved.
Oh, okay.
2 items scheduled for public hearing on December 3rd include CP 719 Sumner Boulevard and Z3218 on South Saunders Boulevard. TC1D 18 omnibus list of text changes was scheduled for public hearing on November 19th. Hearing for 3 items was closed, and the items have been also deferred to November 19th. C2518 on Lead Mine Road, Z1119 on Grove Avenue, Z1519 on Six Forks Road. Hearing for Z619 Davie Street, Harrington Street, Martin Street, West Street was continued to November 19th, and the item was referred to Growth and Natural Resources Committee. That's the CAM rezoning. And then the hearing for Z719 Rock Quarry Road is continued into December 3rd. So that is, item is still outstanding. Now, in addition, the council authorized staff to move forward looking at potentially mapping the transit overlay district to portions of the Western Boulevard BRT corridor. And they also approved an amendment to go through the process for the Cameron Village Streetscape and Parking Plan and request to a citizen petition. At some point, those items will be landing on a future agenda for you. Only other thing I would note is also today at the McKimmon Center is the kickoff meeting for the Western Boulevard corridor study, which is focused on the BRT options and stations. And that was originally supposed to happen the night of Hurricane Dorian blowing through, so it was postponed. The kickoff meeting has now been combined with sort of another Western Boulevard meeting, but it'll be a great chance for members of the public to come out and learn about the corridor study and have an opportunity for input. Of course, we picked another great weather day.
Really, good point.
So stay tuned for our meeting next winter, where we'll probably have, the next meeting will probably have a blizzard or a flood or something, or a plague of locusts.
Thank you, Mr. Director. So pending items, I see that we have no text change items for next week, so there will be no text change committee meeting on the 19th. Wow, we lucked out. However, there is one case for the committee of the whole next week. Am I correct about that? So we probably ought to get a head count for that as well. So is there anybody who we know is not going to make it for the meeting next? It's the evening of the 21st. I can do that. So is there anybody that will not make it on the evening of the 21st to the committee of the whole? Okay.
Travis, did you say you haven't heard back from the applicant? Or?
No. I'm not trying to make contact with the applicant.
So we believe that, yeah, right. So we believe that we will be having that meeting. Yes, we will be having that meeting. All right. And then we have the meeting on the 26th. All right.
And there's no Transportation Committee meeting this month.
Or Strategic Planning Committee.
Or Strategic Planning, but I do plan to send an email to the members of the committee asking what topics would be of interest to take up in strategic planning. Actually, I'll send it to everyone on the commission.
All right.
So when you say, you're talking about the December transportation meeting?
Normally, we would meet the fourth Thursday right before the committee of the whole. That's Thanksgiving.
So I guess I've been getting confused with
Yeah, the transportation meeting hasn't been updated in the calendars properly. It's still showing up as wrong. So we need to get the Transportation Committee meeting times updated in the calendar, in the city calendar. Yeah, in the online city calendar.
And it's officially now 2:45 on the fourth Thursday, I'm sorry, before the committee of the whole meeting.
Right.
And since that's Thanksgiving, that's not going to happen.
Right. All right. Any further comments, questions, concerns? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.